welcome back to the Mark and Carrie podcast. I left last time on a real cliffhanger, and I know everyone's been wondering what's going on. What's the big surprise? Well, the big surprise is a live podcast on Monday, December 2nd, from 6 to 7 o'clock here at the Watson Institute, which is at 111 Thayer Street. We'll be in the Tchaikovsky Forum. We'll do an end of the year wrap up of all the stuff going on around the world, and also just maybe some New Year's resolutions on how to become better podcasters or something like that. But the big surprise, live podcast, December 2nd from 6 to 7 o'clock in the evening. Please, listeners, email us questions. We have an email address, which was really exciting news. And that email address is Mark and Carrie, all spelled out, at brown.edu. So please send us questions. And we'll just be doing some fun stuff on December 2nd in the evening. So please come by.
Just in case any of that wasn't clear, it was all clear, but there was two missing details.
Oh.
Number one, we live in Providence.
Oh, crucial.
It's in Providence, Rhode Island. So 111 Thayer Street, Tchaikovsky Forum, Watson Institute, Providence, Rhode Island. We were thinking about doing it, in London or Miami, but we don't have the budget or the time. Or
Correct.
Any fans in London or Miami, probably.
Yes.
And the other more salient point is come along, right? This is it. Just come along, be in the audience.
Yeah.
We'll do it live. We'll have a good laugh. And it's John's birthday, so you can all say hi to John.
And wish him happy.
And wish him a happy 72nd birthday.
Yes. One more trip around the sun.
He's doing well.
Yes.
Excellent. So where will we begin?
Oh, my gosh. Well, there's a lot of stuff going on around the world in terms of protests.
There is, isn't there?
The people are rising up
everywhere. So where are they rising, Carrie?
I mean, lots of stuff happening in Central and South America. So Evo Morales steps down in Bolivia. Chile, when last I looked at it, they had imposed curfews. I'm not sure if those curfews are still imposed. Ecuador, and of course, Hong Kong over the weekend. So there's a running theme across these various protests. Hong Kong seems to be on very appropriate for us since we're on a university campus. The police are now starting to arrest students on campus. I think that certainly signals an uptick in terms of the intensity by the Hong Kong police force. I mean, I guess I still wonder sort of how does Hong Kong end? How do any of these end, I guess?
Before you get to end, how did they start? So Chile is by many measures one of the most unequal, but one of the most well-off countries in Latin America. It has been relatively politically stable since its democratic transition after Pinochet. And then boom, basically a metro fare rise, right? And it's not a question if we're a little bit annoyed, like we're furious. Now, this is a similar sort of thing that began to undermine Lula in Brazil, which was the failure to invest in infrastructure during the boom years. And again, it's the middle classes feeling squeezed. Their wages may be going up, but costs are going through the roof. And there's a perception and a reality that the vast majority of the gains are going to the top. Hong Kong is exactly the same thing. Now, as for Ecuador, Bolivia, I'm not sure of the details on those, to be perfectly frank. Seems to be some part combination of overreach by the incumbents and basically people throwing the rascals out. But then no doubt that's in response to the fact that, they just don't feel as if they're making ends meet.
Well, with the Yellow Jackets in France, I mean, that was along a very similar
lines. Essentially, the asymmetry of a carbon tax that punished commuters. While basically letting off the rich living in Paris who didn't commute.
I mean, it is interesting that it's a small, I mean, you wouldn't think it would necessarily, people would be irritated by it, but not protest worthy.
But again, think about the US stuff on this, right? So there was maybe about 6 months ago now, a Fed report that said if you got to the 60th percentile, the income distribution, people below 60th or below haven't got back to where they were from before the financial crisis. So 10 years later, right, plus all of these sort of austerity problems and unemployment, etc., they still haven't gotten there. Half of all income gains has pretty much gone to the top 5%. If not the top 1%. Now, that's the United States. This pattern's been replicated pretty much everywhere. So it's just a question of kind. Now, if your budgets are really, really constrained, you don't need much of a slap for it to hurt, right? So we talk about, is there going to be a recession in the United States? And this is why I get so furious with Democrats who want a recession to get rid of Trump. Is that if you're sitting pretty at the top end of the income distribution, a recession to you is meaningless. But if you're one of those families that hasn't rebuilt your wealth and your assets for over 10 years, then you've got no budgetary room whatsoever. if your partner loses their job, if you go part-time, reduced hours, whatever, that's a crisis.
But it's so interesting because, there's been a lot of talk about when are people, middle-class people, going to hit the streets for impeachment, right? That this is going to really rile people up. But I don't think impeachment does actually get people to the streets. It is.
No.
But does that 60th percentile, do they actually hit the streets when something small hits them, like a commuter tax or something like that?
Or the other way around. Why is it that Trump's numbers are staying firm?
Yeah.
Because over the past 2 years, for the first time in a very long time, the 20th percentile and the 40th percentile have seen real income gains. Because you have full employment, right?
Yeah.
And because of that, people are basically rebuilding their balance sheets for the first time in a decade. And that, if you will, the political classes are furious with this person who may or may not be the first preference of these people, but for the first time in forever, they're feeling a little bit richer. They're feeling a little bit more stable. And it seems that everybody wants to take this guy down. They're not concerned with the ethics of impeachment. They're concerned with the fact that they live incredibly fragile lives.
Well, and the 20th and the 40th, and also, on the social issues, so they're seeing wage growth, but then the social issues, like, oh, you like East Coast elites and your arugula, like, leave me alone, like, enough with that, with your social agenda and all that. So
let me ask you a question about this. I was thinking about this. So in many ways, Pete Buttigieg is sort of a candidate that was made up in an incubator by Arthur Anderson, the accounting firm. He's got the perfect CV, right? Military and McKinsey or whatever it is, the whole lot, right? How does he poll with minorities that the Democrats rely upon?
Very, very low. Yeah, not. But you're so right about him, and perfect pronunciation of his name as well. But
I've been practicing. I still can't do AOC.
Oh,
I have to say AOC. So with Buttigieg, I can do that.
Yeah, very, very good, because I still mangle it. But very, very low. They're not. He has almost no support from, especially the African American community. Well, a lot of it around the South Bend stuff that happened. But yeah, his support is really with those middle class.
Right. So if you're in a desperately white state early in the primaries, you're going to get a poll surge.
Yeah.
How's that going to work for you?
Well, you're going to rake in a ton of money.
That may help.
Yeah.
So what else is being going on with impeachment?
Oh,
Impeachment
God,
week, man. This is your Brexit.
It is.
Holy shit, this is your Brexit, right? I have had to suffer this being a Brit for like 2 years. Yeah. And this will be slightly shorter, but it does seem as if it's already been going on for 2 years.
But do you think Brexit might last the rest of your lifetime?
Oh, wow.
That's right. Impeachment might last the rest of our lifetimes. I know.
That's it. The permanent state is now just Brexit and impeachment.
Yeah. Oh, I have to say, everyone knows that I'm a political nut. And even at hour 10, I was still watching. And even I was like, I don't know if I can watch this anymore. But it was really... I think the testimony at a couple things is, it seems like it's complicated, though I don't think it should be complicated. And it's interesting that the Democrats are now doing a reframing, because I don't know if you heard or saw this, but quid pro quo is too difficult for us to understand, because we don't know Latin. So instead, Pelosi's reframing it or recasting it as bribery, because we all know what bribery is. But also, I saw this interesting tweet from Dan Rather that said, there is the America of Donald Trump, but there is also the America of Marie Yovanovitch, which is to say, of these, career statespeople, diplomats that are just doing their best every single day. And I was just really struck by, she was there like for 100 million hours, and always just calm, not flustered. And you just have to really think, all the people that do all this work all the time and are not, and are put in the spotlight, and you're just like, holy cow, there's a lot of lawyers free, but what are we doing to them?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Again, I suppose that what I take away from that, because I can't watch any of this stuff. You're a political junkie. I try to avoid it as much as possible. It's just the noise to signal level is incredibly high, and I can't sort it out. But, absolutely that's true. But to the extent to which there's another America of her, I'm less confident of that. Look, so my shtick is very simple on this. When you use your professional office to basically bully somebody else into following up on a bizarre, unproven and disproven conspiracy theory for nothing more than your political agenda, regardless of where you are as a political leader, if you were on the Providence City Council, you should be out. It's as simple as that, right? But we actually live in a world where nobody seems to care about that.
Correct.
And that itself is deeply worrying. More worrying than the impeachment itself is the fact that, no, look what happened. Basically, I mean, I imagine if I was back in the UK, if I was in any European country, I mean, even Berlusconi would find it hard to get away with this one. And yet it seems to be, you've got his party completely behind him going, well, it was maybe inappropriate. No, it wasn't inappropriate in any other line of work. Right? If you were a government official in Providence City government and you tried to pull that stuff, right, you'd have the feds on you.
Yes. And you have had the feds on you.
And you have the feds on you.
Yeah. I think it's that I mean, I know this is such a boring point. It gets reiterated all the time, but both sides, it doesn't matter what the other side says. The Democrats can say black and the Republicans are going to say white, or vice versa, or whatever. It doesn't, the political tenor of this is that it's just all politics all the time. You listen to the questions and the way that and it's just, we've gotten to this point where it doesn't matter what, there's no principles. We're just the party of no or yes, depending on what side.
But doesn't it ultimately undermine democracy in a very deep sense? Because ultimately, and again, Brexit will bring this in at this point just by illustration, right? So I was in Copenhagen last week, right? And after I do this speech, this guy comes up to me and he says, I'm a very serious bloke, and he says, I want you to help me stop Brexit. And I'm thinking to myself,
responsibility.
I didn't actually know I had kind of like Marvel superhero powers, or I will stop Brexit.
Put on your
So
ring.
I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, we have to stop it. And I said, well, why do we have to stop it? Because it's wrong. I said, well, I might agree that it's wrong, but that was the result of the referendum, which is then we should have another one. And to go back to Trump, I mean, it's basically, we're just going to litigate elections. I mean, the point of elections is you do the election and you stop, and then you throw the rascals out if you don't like the result 4 years later. If we're just down this road now where we do not basically accept the electoral result, we are now trying basically to use due process for political ends, which is basically the same as Ukraine, right? We're just basically, I'm using my position of power to get something that's a political objective. Well, next time this comes around when the roles are reversed, what if the Democrats are playing exactly the same game?
That's exactly right.
It's very dangerous for democracy as a whole.
Well, and I think, because that's the facsimile of this, right? Is that a Democrat, whoever gets in, Mayor Pete wins, and the Republicans decide to impeach him, and it's no longer an electoral process. And I think that's like a real possibility. I mean, Mitch McConnell said that it's going nowhere in the Senate. He blocked the Supreme Court nominee of Merrick Garland. I worry that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is actually no longer alive and she's being propped up. She missed last week's argument. They said it was a stomach virus. But what happens if he gets a nominee or he gets an open seat for the Supreme Court during an impeachment hearing? I don't know what happens to that. I maybe the Democrats and a few Republicans get together and stop that, though I doubt it. So, I mean, all of this is, I think, to your point, the threat to democracy in a real way. Not in an
imaginary way.
Yeah.
I mean, follow this one through. I mean, to me, I think the court stuff is a little bit overdone in the sense that Democrats in particular have this idea that the Warren Court was generalizable.
Yeah, right.
Right? That basically it's a liberal institution. No, it's always been a conservative institution. And progressive liberal administrations have lived with that court, and the court has actually done surprising things. So I don't think we should assume simply because someone's appointed by a conservative that they're corrupt or wrong, right?
Yes.
However, right, if you do have a kind of institutional advantage where the court is very much on one side politically, and you then have Republicans in power, and we've destroyed process and respect for electoral results, that's inherently dangerous.
Well, I think the Supreme Court, you're right, there's probably more of a moving towards the middle on both sides of the aisle. I think the larger federal judiciary, I'm unclear about how they, with the lifetime appointments, how they move. And I mean, but you're right, every president remakes the federal judiciary in either a left-leaning or right-leaning sort of way.
Which is why other countries don't make their judges political appointees.
Yeah. It's maybe
funny that.
Yeah. So this actually transitions into Election Day. We had an Election Day 2 weeks ago, and Democrats did okay. They took from a very unpopular Kentucky governor. They moved the what is it? The House of Delegates. Is that what the name of it is in Virginia? But anyway, the state legislature in Virginia from Republican to Democrat. Those maps were so interesting. The demographics of Virginia that essentially it has changed it just from the DC suburbs essentially as they pushed outward. outward. So it seems as though, with the asterisk on that Virginia is a reliably blue state now. And of course, this is all the signal. Is this the signal that Democrats are going to, wipe the board, whatever it is, win in 2020? I think these are off-year elections. It was a really unpopular Kentucky governor, and Virginia's been changing for a long time. This goes back to impeachment in that the president's going to be on the ballot in November. And so the two things that are also going to be on the ballot policy-wise are healthcare and the economy. And so, this is just back to basic electoral politics in terms of it's not going to come down to impeachment. The country is solidified about how they feel, whether he should be impeached or not. It's actually around issues. So I hope, you just hope as a...
Well, it's around issues, but it's also, as we saw last time, around demographics.
Yeah.
Right? It's young versus old. It's around urban versus rural, increasingly. And when you look at the disjuncture between the popular vote and where the popular vote is located, and then the electoral college and where seats are distributed and how they're distributed, we're beginning to see how there's an even bigger gap opening up amongst all those things that are meant to fit together in a good way as well. I remember seeing one of the maps from 2016, and it was, the Democrats have won the popular vote. It's like, well, yes, because the actual map will show you that it was LA and San Francisco and a couple of bits of the Northwest. And then it was the Boston corridor down to Virginia, and it was Miami.
Yeah.
And that was it. And that's enough. And think about this isn't just those fractions of the country are enough to win the popular vote. That's not the whole country.
Yeah.
And this is happening everywhere. There's a lot of studies now that's shown that what's really behind populism, we're past the sort of it's culture versus it's economics, or it is a combination essentially of urban versus rural and relative advantage, disadvantage, but also social mobility.
Yeah.
Because social mobility is breaking down in both areas. In the cities, because it's unless you're already part of the elite, it's very hard to make it there. And then in rural areas, because the lack of opportunity translates into there's nowhere to go with social mobility, even though it's more open. And the demographics are against it because if you're young, you leave. So that sort of cauldron is a very toxic mix. And we're seeing this not just in the United States. You can tell that story again for most of the rich countries. Cities have made off with all the loot because that's where the rich people with all the loot live.
Yeah. And it mapped like urban and rural is young and old too, right?
Absolutely.
Because 300. So in the Virginia state elections, 18 to 30-year-old voters were up by 300%. So an unreliable voting bloc has to show up in 2020 if the Democrats want to have any chance of winning.
And you know what else that's true?
Oh, in the UK.
Yes, in the British election, because the Brits are going to have an election as well.
Hey, that's awesome.
Yeah, now that they've had something. How many parliaments have they had recently? I can't even remember. Yes, the whole Brexit fiasco has now turned into they're actually going to have an election in December, which they never do.
Oh, it's in December. I thought it was in January. Okay.
No, is it January? I don't know. Basically, it's when the nights are fair drawn in. It's going to be cold and wet and miserable and rainy. So nobody knows what this is going to do to turn out. Now, here's one of the interesting things about this. So the whole place is fractured. It used to just be the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, and they fought it out. And usually when you have an unpopular Labour leader, at least as the mainstream press make sure everyone thinks Jeremy Corbyn is. Whether he's actually unpopular or not remains to be seen. And then there was the establishment with Theresa May. Now, the last time that this happened, Theresa May, all the polls, she was a million miles ahead. And then she lost her majority. And if they ran an extra couple of days, Labour probably would have won it. Because what happened is, it seems that Corbyn is reconnected with the bottom 20 to 30% that basically disappeared from politics. And he's basically got a huge advantage with young people. Now, one of the things that he's offered, I think this is total genius, he's basically going to nationalise the broadband for the country.
Oh.
Right? So everybody gets free broadband.
Wow.
Now, who's that important to? Is that Granny in the pictures on Facebook? No, absolutely not. That's young people, right?
Yep.
So they're very much targeting this. Now, what happened last time was all the polls massively overestimated the Conservative turnout and how much May was going to get, and massively underestimated Labour. And what Corbyn's doing is essentially saying, I don't believe any of the polls. I don't think any of the stuff about us being a bunch of anti-Semites is sticking anywhere outside sort of the chartering classes. And we're going to focus on one thing, mobilising the young. And if we can do that, we can make this work. Now, there's two other parties in the mix. There's the Liberal Democrats, who used to be the middle party, right? Who have come out and said that we should cancel Brexit, thereby, to quote the writer and comedian not Hugo Rifkin, that was his dad, whatever his name is, Rifkin in the UK, I want to give credit where credit's due, that in doing so, they've proven that they are neither liberal nor democratic, which is true.
A sketch.
And to differentiate themselves forward, they've actually just yesterday, the day before, adopted the German Schwarze Null politic. So basically, we shouldn't just run a balanced budget, we should run a budget surplus forever, thereby proving that any lessons of austerity have completely been abandoned in the name of product differentiation. So I have no idea how that even works. Who are you appealing to? Country's been part of austerity for 10 years. You're doing let's be Germans, right? And then you got the Brexit party, Nigel Farage, who will only contest in Labour seats. But at the same time, Boris is going to give you Brexit. So if you were going to vote, if your only concern is Brexit, why would you vote for the Brexit party? Because you might as well vote for the Tories, because at least you'll get other stuff.
Deliver,
Nobody knows how this one's going to shake out.
Holy cow. This is like 100-dimensional chess.
Totally.
There's a SNL
with
sketch.
drunk pawns.
There's an SNL sketch with Elizabeth Warren, and she's like, the secret is money doesn't exist. It's just numbers in a computer. So I was thinking of that when you're like, how does running a surplus for the rest of time even exist?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, what it means is I will not spend on that, but I'll make sure that the pensioners I'm hoping to attract will vote for me, because they don't like spending on stuff.
Elizabeth Warren should adopt nationalized broadband. Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible idea.
Totally.
Because not a free Wi-Fi with my 100 streaming services, that would be incredible.
That's it. And what do you do? I mean, who might be against that? I don't know. What's the tallest building in Philadelphia? Is it the Comcast building?
Is that the one with the super pointy top, the needle?
I think they might be a little bit put out by that.
Yeah.
I mean, market forces are successfully destroying their capital day by day anyway, because nobody likes or wants cable.
Correct.
Right? But they control the broadband.
Yeah.
So to take it away from them.
I mean, that's a real way to make...
Then actually, you've got a two-parter for Elizabeth, right? Number one, nationalise broadband, right? And then make it super fast, Korean speeds, and it's free.
Yeah.
Second one, just tell people, if we do this, you'll never need to call Comcast customer service again.
That might be Grandma
or
Grandpa.
Verizon customer service, right? Think of all of the hours that you will get back in your life from never having to call them
that's
again.
that's like an issue that's like a non-part. Everybody would be for that.
Exactly. Apart from the shareholders of Verizon and Comcast.
Yeah, which I guess I am probably in somewhere my 401k does something.
You probably
like that.
are. Exactly.
But that's someone must have proposed the idea to some of the candidates on something like that.
Maybe, I don't know. It's a tough
policy idea. Well, as we wrap things up, there's I had one fun thing to add to this, and there was a picture of a puppy who's so cute. I know you have a dog, and you would appreciate this. And they've named him Narwhal because he has like a little tail above his nose, and he's like so adorable. And my question was whether that tail actually wags or not, or if it's just,
Have you checked this out?
I haven't.
You haven't tried. So basically, let me get this straight. Between its eyes, it has a tail.
Yes, yeah.
So basically, it's butthead.
Yeah, yes, I guess that's true.
It's doggy butthead.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
I can see how that's cute. I mean, I'm kind of glad that mine doesn't have that, but maybe I'm just a traditionalist. The other dog one, which people can find out, I'm sure, on YouTube, is a speech therapist who taught their dog to press buttons for commands. And the dog now forms sentences.
Oh, God.
which once again makes you think, maybe I shouldn't be eating animals.
Right.
Because they can form sentences.
Humans are we're on our way out with the rising tides. We're just like, okay.
All right, time's up. We will be doing our live thing next.
And it will not be a quid pro quo.
And there will be no quid pro quos involved. Yes. No quids will be pro'd or quo'd.
Yes, on December 2nd from 6 to 7 o'clock in Providence, Rhode Island, United States of America, in Joukowsky, in the Joukowsky Forum. Those of you who are familiar with the Watson Institute.
But most people are not, so that's 111 Thayer Street.
And it's on the first floor.
Correct.
And so we'll see you then.
And I would just like to say goodbye until then, when I will say, hello, you're here, you made it.
We'll see you in early December, everybody.